Well, let's see. Ester and Dae, they're getting ready to go to their father's grocery store. It's not a rush, they have a couple hours. And the phone has rung, and it's Raven. She tells them their father once again canceled the plans. He had been instructed by upper management they needed him for most of the day. And so Ester said to Raven, well, let's surprise Riley Grace, and Dae and I will drop by and pick up the Mustang and visit for a while. So Ester and Dae, they jumped on Ester's motorcycle and rode the bike to an old section of town. Large homes that were built probably 100 years ago, but very well maintained and beautiful homes. And she pulled into Raven's front drive. They went up the porch, and the doorbell was one of those that you twist a little key and it rings the bell. And the door it did quickly open, but eventually opened, and it was Riley Grace. And when she saw who it was, she was so excited. She was jumping up and down and very enthusiastic. And she said, oh, can you come in and stay a while and visit? I'd love you to meet my grandmother. And Ester explained that they were on their way to the grocery store, but they could visit. And so they walked in, and Dae eventually came out of another room and joined him and said, welcomed them. And Riley Grace was very enthusiastic about having them meet grandmother. And this was their dad's mother. And so they walked up a long wooden staircase, curvature one, to the upper level. And Raven knocked on a bedroom door. And she knew Grandma was awake and had probably finished breakfast. And so her grandmother said, come on in. And Raven and Riley Grace walked in first. And Raven quickly told her grandmother that she had a couple friends that she would like to introduce to her. And her grandmother said, well, bring him in, child, bring him in. And so everybody got closer and walked into the bedroom. Her grandmother was in a wheelchair, sitting at a table, and had just finished breakfast. And so Raven had Dae and Ester close by, and she told her grandmother, this is Ester Saint. She just arrived from China, where she grew up, and she is my best friend now. And Then she turned to Dae to Dae, and she said, "And this is Dae. We met at her father's grocery store, and she is also my best friend." And her grandmother was fumbling around on the table looking for some glasses, and she eventually put them on. And she said, "Oh, wow." And I thought Raven was the most beautiful young girl in the world. "You two are equally as beautiful." And then she clarified herself. "And I don't mean just by looks. I can tell you are both very beautiful on the inside. I can tell these things." And then softly, Riley Grace spoke up and said, "And Grandma, they are my best friends too." And her grandmother said, "Well then, that makes 4 of you, and that's a very lucky number. When I was young, I had 3 best friends, and I really miss them a lot. But when I came here from Iceland, it was difficult to maintain touch with them. But we have written many letters, and they are all 3 still alive today. So this is a good thing." And so Grandma said, "I believe I'm tired and would like to go to bed. Would you help me?" And nobody knew for certain who she was talking to, but Esther quickly grabbed her wheelchair and rolled her to the side of her bed, and they pulled the blankets back, and they put Grandma in bed, and Raven pulled the covers over her and gave her a kiss and said, we love you, Grandma." And so her grandmother said, "Well, thank you for coming and saying hello to me." And as they were leaving, Grandmother said something in Icelandic, in the Iceland language, and she yelled it out to Esther. Esther spoke back to her in the same language of Iceland. And then Grandma smiled and fell asleep. They walked out into the hallway, and Raven said, you speak Icelandic?" And Esther said, "Well, my mother's from Iceland, and I wanted to learn the language. And so my father provided me a tutor, but I've never been there, so I know the words, but it's not the same as knowing the language, the dialect." You know what I mean? And Raven said yes. And so all 4 went down the stairs and sat in the living room on some overstuffed furniture. Were very comfortable, and they were visiting. And Raven's phone rang, and it was her father, and he had again been asked to stay longer at the meeting, and so he said probably be late when he got home. And he apologized. And of course Raven said, she loved him, and they hung up. So Dae and Ester looked at each other, and they both had the same thought, and they suggested, Raven, why don't you and Riley Grace come with us to the grocery store and learn the grocery business. Business is improving, and it would be wonderful to have you there and help now and then. And Riley Grace got excited and thought it was a most wonderful idea. And Raven was more than willing, because her day was going to be boring without it. And she loved being with Ester and Dae. So she agreed. And all of our girls jumped. And, well, 3 of them jumped into the Mustang, and Ester rode the Ninja back home. And then they all jumped into the Mustang and went to the grocery store. And once they entered, they said, they walked up to Ester and Dae's dad and greeted him. And he said, this is wonderful. You're on time, and the store needs a lot of work. And Raven said, Dad, we have 2 additional hard workers that would like to learn the job. And Mr. Ho looked at Raven and Riley Grace, and he questioned Riley Grace first, and he said, tell me, how many languages do you speak? And Riley Grace was staring at him like he was a rock star. She was smiling and just in awe of Mr. Ho. And she said, well, I speak English and Spanish and French, and I'm learning Chinese. And Mr. Ho said, that is good. And he turned to Raven, and he said, and how many languages do you speak? And Raven said, well, our father is French, and so he insisted we learn French. And of course I speak Spanish, because I know many, many people that are speaking Spanish. And of course, I want to know what they're saying. And he said, oh, that is good, because many of our customers speak other languages, and it is good to know them. He said, I will have Dae teach all 3 of you what we do in this store, and then she can arrange your work schedules as you are readily available. And they all smiled, and especially Riley Grace was very enthusiastic, and she was smiling with a huge smile at Mr. Ho and thanked him over and over. So all 4 girls did a group hug, and then Dae said, let's go to the back, and that's where it all starts. And so they all walked to the back room, where it smelled like vegetables and fresh produce. Dae explained the first in, first out concept, and how they order product, and how they position it in the back, and how they bring it out. And then they came out front, and she explained how they arrange it and rotate it. And she explained all the boxes of different foods and how those are ordered and how they are rotated. And so within a couple hours' time, they said, we have just accomplished what it takes me a whole day to do. All three of you have done very well, and you have learned the job. I am very happy to say that." So they went up to Mr. Ho, and they expressed to him how satisfied she was that all three girls knew the job. So Mr. Dae said, "Well, that's excellent. Why don't you three go ahead and have the rest of the day off, because the store looks fantastic, and Dae can arrange your work schedules." And so he said, to Esther and Raven and Riley Grace, "Thank you for being such hard workers, and I will see you again very soon." And so the four girls, they started to leave. There was a phone call again, and Raven's father said that they had finished early, and if she wanted to have dinner, he'd take Raven and Riley Grace out for dinner. So she said, "We'll be home in 10 minutes. Love you, Dad." And so Ester and Dae took Raven and Riley Grace home. Raven made a comment, "We don't know what dinner means to Dad. Sometimes it's McDonald's, sometimes it's a nice restaurant, but it'll be fun either way. And so we'll look forward to it." And she thanked Ester and Dae so much for the wonderful day and being such good friends. And Riley Grace said the same thing. So after dropping the Raven and Riley Grace off, Ester and Dae, they took off for home.